Also, sometimes there's a hadith. So for example, those of you that are in the Sahih al-Bukhari class in Valley Ranch Masjid, we mentioned Raddu salam, responding with a salam to someone who's not Muslim, the hukum of it, the ruling of it. The Prophet ﷺ said that if someone from the Christians and the Jews says salam to you, then you should say wa alaykum, and upon you. However, the vast majority of scholars say if a Christian or a Jew says assalamu alaykum to you, you should say wa alaykum assalam. How is it that they rejected a clear hadith? All right, the context of it, that back then Bani Qurayza and Banu Nadir and Banu Qaynuqa and so on and so forth, they used to say to the Prophet ﷺ, assalamu alaykum. Wassam obviously is not salam. Sam would be wishing death and sickness and curse upon a person. But they'd say it really, really fast so you couldn't understand if they were saying assam or assalam. Are they wishing death on you or are they wishing peace on you? So the Prophet ﷺ said, respond with wa alaykum. However, the vast majority of the ulama, of the scholars, they said to respond wa alaykum assalam if you can hear them say assalamu alaykum. That would constitute an apparent rejection of the hadith, but it's not a rejection of the hadith. Also, for example, the very contentious issue, if someone walks into the masjid and the imam is giving khutbah, all right? We're going to get to this, how a hadith can be understood in different ways. If the imam is giving khutbah and you walk into the masjid, there's a clear hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told one of the companions to stand up and pray. Do you pray tahiyatul masjid or not? Wait a minute, how is that possible? That there are some scholars that said that if a person walks in the masjid and the imam is giving khutbah, sit down. Okay? The Ahnaf and the Malikiyah, they have the opinion that the Prophet ﷺ was speaking to a poor companion. So I'm going to show you guys usul at work here. He was speaking to a poor companion when he told him to stand up and pray 2 rak'ahs. And the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted by that, and yubayyina halihi. He wanted to show the hal of that companion. He wanted to show the situation of that companion. So when he pointed out to him, stand up and pray, the Sahaba would see clearly the poverty that he was in. All right? Now, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Shafi'i, they said that doesn't matter, even if that was the case, because the Prophet ﷺ would never order something to be done that's not from the religion to make a point without clarifying it. So the hukum still stands, the ruling still stands. However, is there room to argue the other point? Yes, there is room to argue the other point, that if a person walks in and the imam is giving khutbah, that the Prophet ﷺ was making an exception here. There's still room to have this discussion. It's not as black and white once you understand the reason for the disagreement, the reason for the dispute. And so it's very, very important to study the context. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to go through some of the causes of difference of opinion, how these things happen. There are 2 books that I'll recommend to you guys, inshallah ta'ala. One of them is from Shah Waliullah. It's called Al-Insaf fi Bayan Sabab al-Ikhtilaf. Al-Insaf fi Bayan Sabab al-Ikhtilaf. The other one is a book by Imam bin Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala, which is called Al-Khilafu Bayn al-Ulama'i wa Asbabuhu wa Mawqifuna minhu. Al-Khilafu Bayn al-Ulama'i wa Asbabuhu wa Mawqifuna minhu. All right, so these are 2 books that are very nicely written, which basically explain how ulama could differ in the presence of a hadith. And so we'll go through some of these reasons. One of them is that simply that the evidence or that the hadith was not known to the scholar at the time he issued his judgment. That is a possibility. It happened even amongst the Sahaba. A lot of people take great offense to that. And again, we have to be intellectually honest when we study history. Even the Sahaba, there were some Sahaba that did not know certain hadith. And we find many, many, many different examples of that. In the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, we find that there was a plague in Sham. Okay? And when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when that plague broke out, he asked the Sahaba what they thought should be done. And they all had different opinions. Then Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu ta'ala anhu came and he said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that if a plague breaks out in the land, then don't go there. If you're not there, don't go there. And if you're there, don't leave there. If plague breaks out, if you're there, don't leave. And if you're not there, don't go. So once Abdurrahman bin Auf came with, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say this, all the Sahaba said, okay, there it goes then. So they had different opinions before that, but Abdurrahman ibn Auf said, wait, but I heard the Prophet ﷺ speak about this issue. So that shows you that the Sahaba did not know the hadith. In fact, I'll give you a very perplexing fiqh issue as well. What's the iddah of a pregnant woman? What is the iddah, the waiting period of a pregnant woman? Until she delivers, right? None of the brothers knew. That's a problem, by the way. All right. What's the iddah of a widow? 4 months and 10 days. Okay. Now, what's the iddah of a pregnant widow? You see the problem here? There are two texts, very clear. The iddah of a pregnant woman in the Quran is أَجَلَهُنَّ أَنْ يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. That their waiting period is until it ends when they deliver a baby. Whereas the iddah of a widow, وَالَّذِينَ يَتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and about the woman whose husband passes away, that their iddah would be 4 months and 10 days. So what's the ruling on a widow who is pregnant? What happens there? So the Sahaba had a dilemma. Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, they initially ruled that she should wait the longer period of the two. The longer period of the two would mean that, again, let's say that my pregnancy ended, or that I delivered a baby 2 months after my husband passed away. Then I'll still have to wait till 4 months and 10 days. Or if I'm still pregnant when 4 months and 10 days finishes, I need to wait until I deliver the baby. You guys understand? So that was the opinion of Ali and Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu initially. But then they found a hadith. One of the companions came forth, Abu Musa radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he permitted Subay'a radiallahu ta'ala anha, al-Aslamiyya, Subay'a al-Aslamiyya, to get married only a few nights after her husband passed away. Why? Because she gave birth the day after her husband passed away. So she gave birth the day after her husband passed away, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed her to get married just a few nights after. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ ended her iddah with the shorter of the two. So Ali and Ibn Abbas reversed the opinion then. So there are numerous examples I can give. There are over 100 of them actually that are listed. One of them is kind of funny, that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was sitting in his house, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu came and he knocked on his door, and he sought permission to enter 3 times, and then he left. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was sitting in his house, and basically, him and Abu Musa were boys. So he was like, why did you wait for me to come receive you at the door? You should have just knocked and then came in. All right, give it some time and then came in. Abu Musa said, but I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that if you seek permission 3 times and you're not given permission, then you leave. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, are you sure the Prophet ﷺ said that? He said, yeah, I'm sure the Prophet ﷺ said that. He said, get some other Sahaba that have heard the Prophet ﷺ hear that too. So Abu Musa radiallahu anhu goes and he tries to find some other Sahaba that have heard the Prophet ﷺ say that as well. And Umar radiallahu anhu makes him establish that more Sahaba heard that as well, because Umar radiallahu anhu was surprised that he never heard that from the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So this is something that took place, there's no doubt about it, that sometimes a judgment was made even by a companion without knowing a hadith that was explicit in regards to that case. There's another, number 2, the second reason could be that the hadith is known to the scholar. This is especially in regards to ashab al-ra'i, the people of opinion, like Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, that they know a hadith, but they doubt its authenticity. So others are convinced of its authenticity, but they have doubts about its authenticity, and they would rather rely upon their reasoning until they're sure about its authenticity. Meaning we're going to put this on the side, we'll investigate it, and if we find it to be authentic, then we'll reverse our opinion. But in the meantime, I'd rather go with my reasoning until I'm 100% sure that the hadith is authentic. It also happened in the time of the Sahaba, when Fatima bint Qais radiallahu ta'ala anha, when she was divorced the 3rd time. Fatima bint Qais was married to a companion by the name of Abu Amr ibn Hafs. And when Abu Amr divorced her the 3rd time, meaning it was an irrevocable divorce, they didn't know what to do in regards to the iddah, in regards to the waiting period. So it wasn't clear, because it seems like that was the first triple divorce in Islam. All right. Before then, they were used to the concept of one divorce, and then the iddah either expires or a woman is taken back. This was the first time, it seems, that there was a triple divorce in Islam, that there were 3 divorces given to one person. So they didn't know what to do. So she went to, she went to her home. She left the house after the 3rd divorce, and he sent her some barley. And she thought that that was really cheap and really insulting and whatever it was. That he sent her some barley. So they didn't know what to do, whether there is a iddah or not, whether there is nafaqah, whether there is maintenance that's due or not, whether he has to give her anything at that point or not. And the Prophet ﷺ, instead, he decided that because it was the final case of talaq, because in the other 2 talaqs, when there's revocable talaq, the woman stays in the home even as she's in her iddah. And, there's a chance for her to be taken back and so on and so forth. But in the 3rd case, the Prophet ﷺ told Fatima bint Qais to go and stay with one of the Sahabiyat. Okay, so he completely absolved the relationship and to finish her iddah there. So there was a iddah there before she can get remarried, but she did not stay in the home of her husband after that because there was no chance of them ever getting back together at that point. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he heard that narration, all right, he doubted its authenticity. Okay? So he said that until I'm sure of it, until I'm able to confirm it, this was in his khilafah, he said that we'll act upon the first ayah of Surah Al-Talaq, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن, that do not make them leave their homes. So he said, until I'm sure of the authenticity of the hadith, then I'm still going to act upon this. So this was true with the Sahaba, it was true with the scholars, especially Ashabul Ra'i. Okay, especially when it came to the people of opinion, again, that were in Iraq, and that we're dealing with many, many, many fabricated ahadith and people making things up and philosophies and so on and so forth. Number 3 is that the scholar forgot the hadith when he made the judgment. And this is again very difficult. How can a scholar forget a hadith? Okay, I can tell you in my mini capacity, and I'm not comparing myself to any of these imams, and I can tell you that there are many times that I memorize a hadith, but when I was asked a question, I wasn't able to bring that hadith to that answer. I didn't relate it, or I forgot it, or something of that sort. SubhanAllah, as soon as I went home, I remembered it, and then I called the person back, right? Because sometimes it's there, but it's not there, right? You're just not connecting it to the incident or something of that sort. And and Imam al-Dihlawi says, even the Prophet ﷺ forgot. When did he forget? In Salah, for example. The Prophet ﷺ, after Salah, he forgot a verse, and he said to Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu, why didn't you remind me of the verse? Why didn't you remind me of the ayah? So he thought that the Prophet ﷺ just simply omitted it, or it was abrogated, and the Prophet ﷺ said, no, I'm a human being, sometimes I forget. So to say that, A'udhu billah, how could you say that Malik or Abu Hanifa or Shafi'i or Ahmed could forget is wrong. Or to say that about any Sahabi, or to say it about any scholar. And subhanAllah, once again with the Sahaba, we see that one time Umar ibn Khattab and Ammar ibn Yasir, may Allah be pleased with them, they went out on a journey and they woke up in a state of janaba, meaning they needed to do ghusl. They needed to take showers. Now here's the problem. During this travel, and there was this caravan, whatever it was, they both needed to do ghusl, and there was no water. So what do? Do they do tayammum? What do they do? What do you do if you need to do ghusl and you're on a plane and there's no water in the sink? What do? Do you just not pray? What's the hukum? What's the ruling? What do you do? Okay, sisters as well. What do you do if at the time of your tuhur, your purity, there's no water? You do tayammum? How do you do tayammum? Do you put dirt all over your body, or do you just do the regular? Okay, so how did that hukum come about? Umar and Ammar didn't know what to do. Ammar radiallahu ta'ala, you know what he did? He started rolling around in the dirt. He said, water, he just used his qiyas, he used his reasoning. He said, okay, fine, well that's tayammum for wudu. He said, but we don't know what to do for ghusl. He said, I'm just going to get dirt all over my body. So he started rolling around in the dirt. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said, forget that, I'll just do ghusl when I get home and I'll make up the prayer. And that's what Umar radiallahu anhu did. So they both took their different opinions completely all together. Even the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, they came to the Prophet ﷺ, and Rasulullah ﷺ, when he was asked about it, the Prophet ﷺ, he laughed and he said, Ya Ammar, it would have been enough for you to just strike the dirt with your hands and wipe your face. You didn't have to roll around in the dirt. Now, Ammar radiallahu anhu, he told people about this hukum and so on and so forth. He mentioned this incident. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa and he heard that Ammar was telling people that they don't need to do ghusl if they don't have water, he needed to clarify it. So he brought Ammar back in and he told Ammar, what is it that you're telling the people about? And he's saying, remember the incident where me and you went out and we were in a journey and there was a caravan and we didn't know what to do? And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said, okay, yeah, I remember. Meaning, I remember that incident now. So Ammar brought it back to Umar radiallahu anhu's attention that, remember, we had this incident, this is where I'm deriving this hukum from. And what it could mean is that Ammar, when he went to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him about it, Umar was not present. But the point is that Ammar went and he reminded Umar of the incident and he told him what happened as a result of that. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, are you sure, O Ammar? And he said, yes. And Ammar said, look, if you want, I won't tell anyone anymore. And Umar radiallahu anhu said, no, if you're sure that this is what the Prophet ﷺ told you as a result of that incident, then go ahead and share that. It's okay, you can keep teaching that. So that's number 3. Number 4 is that the scholar is aware of the evidence, but he understands it differently. So the same evidence is presented to two different ulama, but they understand it differently, based on other ahadith, based on the language, based on different things, that they have a way of understanding it differently. And this happens many, many, many times amongst the Sahaba and amongst the Madhab. So for example, what does it mean, لا جناح عليكم إن طلقتم النساء لم تمسوهن? There's no blame on a person, or there's nothing due on a person whenever he divorces a woman and he has not touched her. Is a lams here a touch? This is a very big issue in the Arabic language and in Islamic jurisprudence. What does lams mean? Okay, does it mean to be intimate? Does it mean to almost be intimate? Or does it mean just a touch? Okay, so for example, you'll see that the Shafi'is take the touch literally. Okay, whereas other madhahib provide more context to it. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah found the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu kissing Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha while he was fasting. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't break his fast, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't renew his wudu. So Imam Ahmad originally was acting upon the opinion of Imam al-Shafi'i in regards to a lams. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, after that, in regards to that hadith, he took that hadith, he acted upon that hadith instead. So it's, a lot of times you'll find the scholars disagreeing about that, so they'll take into consideration what Maryam says, لم يمسسني بشر ولم أكو بغيا. I've never been touched by a man. What did Maryam alayhi salam mean when she said, I've never been touched by a man? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean whenever he talks, whenever he mentions lams in the Quran? Is it referring to intercourse, or is it referring to something close to it? Or is it referring to a literal touch? Also, the very famous incident that took place in the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Prophet ﷺ said, no one of you should pray Asr until he reaches Banu Qurayza. That's the very famous example in Khilaf. Okay? No one of you should pray his Asr until he reaches Banu Qurayza. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, what he meant by that was to hurry up. Okay? Hurry up. Don't stop and pray Asr now. We'll get to Banu Qurayza and then we'll pray Asr. Now the Sahaba got delayed and Asr was ending on the way to Banu Qurayza. Some of them prayed. So some of them understood the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the injunction to say we need to pray now. Some of them waited until they got to Banu Qurayza, and it was after the adhan of Maghrib, and they prayed Asr then. And the Prophet ﷺ, he approved the actions of both of them. Alright? So some of them understood it, and this is an usuli discussion. Alright? In the presence of something that is specific, do you take a general statement and then do away with that which is specific? Meaning we know that Asr ends at the time of Maghrib. The Prophet ﷺ gave us a vague statement. Will we use the vague statement to do away with what we already know specifically to be true? Or will we take the specific statement and say that the Prophet ﷺ, because this is a statement that can be interpreted in many ways, we'll stick to what we know that's specific. From an usuli perspective, the Sahaba that stopped and prayed Asr were right from an usuli perspective. But the Prophet ﷺ understood that those companions used their best reasoning in the presence of that statement of his ﷺ. And they did what they did, and the Prophet ﷺ did not censor any of them. And that's the point here. Okay, that the Prophet ﷺ, even in his time, he understood that the Sahaba can understand things in different ways. The fifth one, and this is a very, very important one, the scholar is aware of the hadith and considers it to be authentic, but he also considers it to be mansukh, abrogated. If you don't understand an-nasakh wal-mansukh in hadith, you will drive yourself insane. I see it all the time, even in issues of aqeedah, by the way. All right? You'll take a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said early on in Islam, and then the Prophet ﷺ reversed that ruling, and you use that hadith and you say, it's in al-Muwatta, it's in al-Bukhari, right? What do you mean? All right? And that's a very, very, very serious issue. So for example, having to do wudu after eating something that was cooked by fire. Do we have to do that now? Every time we eat food that's been cooked by fire. There is a hadith, there was a time in Islam where if you ate anything that was touched by the fire, meaning cooked food, you had to do wudu every time. All four of the madhabs, though, believe that to be an abrogated hadith. Okay? Also, for example, we find that in the salah, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says that when the prayer was first obligated, when salah was first made fard, he said that we were allowed to speak in our salah, just like we do in tawaf. We still talk to each other in prayer. So he said a man would come and he would ask his friend, how many rak'ahs of prayer are left? All right? Can you imagine that? Assalamu alaikum. How many rak'ahs are we? Why is this imam reading Surah Al-Baqarah and Maghrib, right? The point is that they could talk to each other. They wouldn't have these long drawn out conversations. Just like now in tawaf, you got some people hanging, talking on their cell phones the entire way. You got some people that'll say, how many rounds do we have left? How many have we done? They'll say some basic things here and there. Other than that, it becomes excessive. But even in salah at one point, if someone sneezed, you said alhamdulillah, another person said yarhamukallah. Now, there was once where a companion came and he didn't hear the abrogation. So he went out on a journey and the Prophet ﷺ abrogated that, where salah was now made prohibited. And this guy came in, he said, Salaamu Alaikum. He's a companion. He said, Salaamu Alaikum. No one said, Wa Alaikum Assalam. Then he sneezed and he said, Alhamdulillah. No one said, Yarhamukallah. So he got upset. He said, what's wrong with you people? Ma bikum. Right? What's going on with you guys? Why aren't you talking? So the Sahaba couldn't respond to him, so they instead started sending him signs like, be quiet. And he kept talking throughout the salah. Right? Like, did you lose your minds? What's going on with you people? Because he didn't hear the abrogation. Miskeen. He's just talking to them the entire salah. And the Prophet ﷺ, after the salah, he made it clear. He said, look, whoever was speaking, let him know that this used to be halal. So he validated what the man did, but now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited it. Khalas, it's over. All right? Simple as that. So that's also something, in one case, the abrogations. And even, by the way, we find in Bukhari something that took place. Salah, initially, when people used to do ruku', the Prophet ﷺ, he legislated that instead of putting, in the bowing motion, instead of putting the hands above the knees, on the thighs above the knees, the Prophet ﷺ used to clasp his hands. So when you do ruku', you would basically put your hands between, and you would clasp your hands. All right, there's a podium here, so I can't demonstrate it to you guys. But again, instead of putting your hands on your legs, you'll actually clasp them together. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu went out on a journey, and he came back, and Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, and he is who he is, was unaware of the abrogation. So Ibn Mas'ud was also putting his hands together when he did ruku', and then it was made clear to Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu that the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba now to put their hands above their knees. So Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu acted in accordance with that. So there are times that a hadith is authentic, but a hadith is abrogated, it's mansukh, and there are times that a scholar might see a hadith, but he'll consider it to be mansukh, like Imam Malik rahimahullah said again about al-Muwatta, that sometimes we leave a hadith so that people can know anna ala ilmin tarakna, that there are some things that we left in here, some ahadith, so that people don't say Imam Malik must not have known the hadith. I left it there so that people know that we know the hadith, but we decided to act in accordance with other evidence. All right. Number 6. Sometimes the scholar believes that the evidence presented is authentic. It's authentic hadith. All right. And he has no way of knowing whether it's been abrogated or not. So he doesn't know whether it's abrogated or not. Studying whether hadith is mansukh, you'll study the age of the narrator, you'll study many, many different factors. All right. He can't tell. So he knows it's authentic. He can't tell, but there is a stronger text in his opinion that contradicts it. a stronger text contradicts it, or many of the scholars, they said that a consensus will take precedence over that. If there's an authentic hadith that's abrogated, or that you can't tell is abrogated, and it seems to be clear-cut, but there is a consensus amongst the companions on an issue, then it must mean that we're not getting something about the hadith. All right? So we'll see many different times, and that's why we said Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that instead of claiming consensus on an issue, say لا نعلم خلافا في ذلك. We just don't know of another opinion. Imam Ahmad was very afraid of people shutting the door on different opinions by saying that there was a consensus. I'll give you guys an example of this, and please don't ask me for too much detail on the riba part here because it has to do with riba. I don't want this to become an Islamic finance class right now. There are two ahadith in Sahih Muslim. They're both in Sahih Muslim. One of them that the Prophet ﷺ says that riba is only on an-nasi'ah. Now riba an-nasi'ah is what's known as riba al-jahiliyyah, the interest in the days of ignorance. What is it? Essentially it's late fees. The riba in the days of ignorance was that, I loan you $100, you pay me back $100 in a month. If you don't pay it back to me in a month, then I'll add $20. Okay? So riba al-jahiliyyah, what's known as the days of ignorance, the riba in the days of ignorance is late fees. That's what they used to do, so they kept on burying people in debt, which is what credit card companies do today. And unfortunately, even sometimes, Islamic schools do these things, by the way, not knowing the ruling on it. It's something good to correct sometimes. I've seen Islamic schools implement it. There are other ways to penalize in Islam that are allowed to penalize someone that owes you money, but adding the amount to it is not permissible. So the concept of a late fee is impermissible. It's actually the origin of riba in Islam. So there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that riba is only a nasi'ah. There's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that